Hello friends, I'm Doug Terrell, and this is History in Comments. Today is the 18th day of August, and the 230th of the year 2021. Continental Europe was strongly influenced by the Catholic Church. Most of the kings were Catholic, and the idea of a non-state church was pretty much non-existent. We've also pointed out before that the Queen is the official head of the Church of England. France tried an interesting experiment in 1572. The French Protestant king married Margaret Valois. In a nutshell, it did not work out. 6 days later, there was a massacre, and the religious wars reignited. Margaret was from a royal family and tended to support her brothers over the king. The whole story would make Hollywood blush, and the various affairs by both parties. I find it a bit hypocritical to have an affair in the middle of a religious war, where adultery is clearly taught against by both parties. The Roanoke colony is again in the news today. The first European child born in the New World is born on this day in 1587, Virginia Dare. What happened to Virginia and the entire colony is a mystery. 3 years later, supply ships arrived from England to find the settlement deserted. In 1612, 80 years before Salem, Massachusetts had their witch trials, rural England is taking their turn. The story reads a lot like the French king and his queen, with a bit of hocus pocus. It seems the idea of witches was not uncommon in rural Yorkshire, but the law was a witch could not do harm to another person. That would get you tried and hung. 12 people, 9 women and 3 men, were accused of murder by witchcraft. 10 were found guilty and hanged. In a related thought, it was not taking communion at the Church of England during the year was also a crime, but you couldn't get hung for that. Explorer Meriwether Lewis is born in Virginia in 1774. His father died when Lewis was quite young. Widow Lewis remarried, and the family moved to Georgia. Thomas Jefferson selects him to head an expedition of the upper area of the Louisiana Purchase and beyond to the Pacific Northwest. Lewis selects William Clark to assist him. A large meteor is reported across England as it passes over the east coast and most likely lands in the North Sea. The year is 1783. Chicago businessman Marshall Field is born in 1837. A native of Massachusetts, the young Field will begin working in a dry goods store as a teenager. Looking at opportunities in the West, he moves to Chicago along with his brother. There they continue in the merchant trade. Over time and through various partnerships, he goes on to be the sole owner of Marshall Fields and Company. In the late 1860s, Fields will have sales of $125 million in 1860 dollars. The store will be a Chicago landmark until 2006, when it's purchased by New York-based Macy's. The young United States was to sponsor an expedition to explore, but it takes several years and a couple tries to get the funding and congressional approval in place. Typical government. The flotilla of 6 ships with a complement of scientists on board departs Hampton Roads, Virginia on this day in 1838. The trip will cross the Atlantic and the Pacific twice before returning to New York almost 4 years later. Pierre-Jules Janssen, a French scientist who was primarily an astronomer. We all have seen rainbows caused by sunlight refracting through raindrops. The same thing happens when light passes through a glass prism. If the light is passed through a fine grate, different elements produce bright lines in the spectrum and at specific points depending on the element. Janssen on this day in 1868, while observing the sun, noticed a single bright line in the yellow region of the spectrum. This band did not align with any known elements that had been observed on Earth. Working with the chemist Edward Franklin, they name it helium after the Greek word for the sun, helos. Few inventions are truly developed by a single person, and often who gets credit is distorted by many facts. We all have heard how the Wright brothers were the first to fly an airplane in December of 1903. A lot of people were working on the idea at the time. On this day, 4 months before the Wrights, German Carl Jeho takes a flight of about 55 feet and 3 feet in altitude. The aircraft is a powered glider, and it is debatable if the craft had control surfaces, which the Wrights did. Born Francis Factor, just 7 months Born Francis Factor just 7 months after the family landed on Ellis Island, known as Frank to the family and heir to the father's cosmetic company. After his father passed, he changed his name to Max Factor Jr. The original Polish name was Maximilian Faktorowicz. Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration and a World War II veteran, Caspar Weinberger is born in 1917. Weinberger began his political career in the California State Assembly and moved to Washington with the Nixon administration. Actress Shelley Winters is born Shirley Schiff in St. Louis in 1920. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter is 94 years old today. You do not have to be a baseball follower, but simply having been breathing air the last 15 years of the 20th century to recognize the name Marge Schatz. Born into a wealthy Cincinnati family in 1928, she married into another wealthy Cincinnati family. Her husband died suddenly and left her a widow at 39. A lifelong Reds fan, she purchased controlling interest of the team in 1984. Marge was colorful and sassy. It would be the sassy part that would get her in trouble with Major League Baseball and lead to her selling the team in 1999. Another baseball figure was born in 1934, albeit far less controversial. Roberto Clemente, a native of Puerto Rico, played 18 seasons with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Actor and director Robert Redford is 85 today. He gets the red hair naturally, as he has Irish blood on both sides of his family and a bit of Scots. Did you know the percentage of Scots have more redheads than the Irish? Natural red is the rarest hair color, and only about 2% of the population having it, but natural blonde is not far ahead with only 3%. Somewhere close to 80% of the people are in the dark brown to black range. Finally, actor Martin Mull is 78 years today. And that concludes history for August the 18th. I'm Doug Terrell. Now go do something worth remembering.